Hey plant nerds, it's been a while. I have gotten a lot of requests to do an updated Hoya collection. However, that video would probably be over an hour long and no one wants to sit through that. Well, actually, I would sit through that, but I don't want to edit that. So I thought I would break down some of my collection videos into smaller, more palatable videos. So the first video in this series that I'm planning to do is my Hoya lacunosa collection. I have a lot of lacunosa and I absolutely love this specific type of Hoya. So I wanted to show you guys all of the ones that I have in my collection right now, and there's quite a few of them. My friend Betsy over at the channel Betsy Begonia recently did a Hoya lacunosa collection video, and I thought it was really cool, and I wanted to show you all my little babes. From the start of me collecting houseplants and me collecting Hoya, my lacunosa has been the one Hoya that just blooms constantly. Lacunosas all have very similar leaf shapes. It's a lanceolate leaf. It does vary between all of the different types of lacunosa, but in general, they all have very similar leaves. They all have very similar looking blooms. Some have some differences and they all smell amazing. And another really cool thing about lacunosa is that the lacunosa flowers are used in some skincare products. I've used a face oil by Sonia Drakkar that had Hoya porcelain flower extract, which is the lacunosa flower. There is also a moisturizer from the company Bubble, which I did order it, and it seems very geared towards teens. But the moisturizer in that line also has Hoya porcelain flower extract, and it's said to be able to soothe irritated skin, reduce redness. So it's even another reason to love these lacunosas even more. Today I wanted to start off the video with my first ever lacunosa. I believe this is the lacunosa variety pallidiflora, although when I purchased it, it was just labeled as Hoya lacunosa. I bought this one at a local nursery and it was a beautiful full pot, and it's made many appearances on my Instagram. This thing flowered constantly. Upwards of 20 peduncles blooming at one time, just hanging down. It was absolutely gorgeous. And then I let it go a little too dry, a little too often. So I decided to repot it because it wasn't looking too healthy, just to check the roots. And the roots all looked decent. So I repotted it into this beautiful pot, and I basically gave my lacunosa a bowl cut. And now it has put off all of this new growth. Because the roots were healthy, I knew that it would regrow, so I wasn't too scared to cut it, but it did make me sad to lose my big, beautiful plant. Here we are today. It has all of this green up here is new growth. This lacunosa is what caused me to fall in love with this type of Hoya. All right, next up on the Hoya lacunosa love train is this Hoya lacunosa Amarillo. Now, I'll be quite honest, when I first saw this one hit the market or saw it posted on Facebook groups, I did not care for it. And part of me was like, that just looks like a sick plant. However, my friends Lydia, Jesse, Rachel, and I went to California a few months ago. Lydia reached out to Ara from the shop Plantasmic Instagram and asked her if we could swing by and take a look at her collection. And she did have this beautiful Hoya lacunosa Amarillo. And then that's when I got the hype. And surprisingly enough, Ara sent me a message when she found out it was my birthday and said she wanted to send me a little something. She also told me to just not get my hopes up. It wasn't anything special. And this is what came in the mail. And this is definitely special. It has grown 2 new leaves at the top. In my care, I did have it under some really bright grow lights, and those leaves are a little bit chlorotic. They're very light green. So I have since moved it away from those grow lights, and I have it sitting behind me on the shelf where it's getting some good natural light coming through this east window. The next Hoya lacunosa I want to talk about is the Hoya lacunosa black leaves. Now, I have called this plant on Instagram and in the video that I unboxed it a Croniana. And there is some debate if Croniana is actually a thing. Lacunosa leaf shape can change drastically based on conditions, whether you have high light, high humidity, high light, low humidity. But this one does have the cordate leaves and it seems pretty consistent. However, I'm still referring it to as a lacunosa because I truly do think it's a lacunosa. I unboxed this a few years ago and it was a small 4-inch pot, and it's still in that same pot, which shame on me. However, it has continued to pump out new growth, and blooms all the time. You can see on this plant there are some peduncles that have a very long rachis or spathe. I don't remember the term, but it basically is just a history of how much this plant has bloomed. It's just a happy and healthy plant. The foliage on the newer leaves is very dark maroon, appearing almost black. Some of the older leaves have faded back down to green, but we still do have some black showing through here. And regardless if it's green or dark black, I still love it. And I'm so happy how much it's grown. Now, contrasting the Hoya lacunosa black leaves, we have the Hoya lacunosa Louisa's silver. And this one is completely silver. It's almost as if a Hoya silver dollar was crossed with a lacunosa, and we have the lacunosa leaf shape, but the silver dollar coloring. There is just beautiful silver blue foliage all over this plant. I got this one from Unsolicited Plant Talks, and it's been really doing well. It's grown quite a few vines and leaves, and I absolutely love the foliage on this plant, and I can't wait to see the blooms. All right, so next up with my lacunosas is one of my absolute favorite right now. I'm probably gonna say that a lot, but this one is a favorite of mine. It is the lacunosa Mr. Tent. This one has become an easy favorite because of how uniquely shaped and large the leaves are of this Hoya. Such a prehistoric looking plant, and that's what I really love about Hoya in general, the ones that have like a dark contrasting vein or a textured leaf with the raised venation. And this one has the textured leaves with the raised venation. And these leaves are just so big and gorgeous. This one does have quite a bit of splash on it. This one has not bloomed for me yet. It has produced 2 peduncles. One fell off very early on. The other one actually had a bunch of buds develop, and they all turned yellow and fell off. And it currently is rebudding on that same peduncle. I'm not holding my breath because for some reason this one just doesn't want to show me the flowers. Next up is my Hoya lacunosa snow caps. Now, every time I post anything about this specific lacunosa online, I get a lot of messages, people saying that looks just like a royal flush. I bought mine as a royal flush. They look exactly the same. And yes, I do agree they look the same. I had not had a royal flush in my collection until recently, so I have that coming up next. However, my royal flush has not bloomed, so I couldn't really compare the blooms on this snow caps, which happen all the time, to the royal flush, but one day I will. This one has beautiful, beautiful splashy foliage. The new leaves come out a deep purple as they fade to green. And this one is just filled with peduncles. You can just see all of those white spots hanging here because this one blooms constantly. And again, these blooms are gorgeous. Oh, and here's an open bloom. Oh my gosh, yeah. It's the lacunosa smell. It's like a lily. I don't really know how to describe it. It's very floral. Didn't really taste like anything. And as promised, our next one is the Hoya lacunosa Royal Flush. Again, it's hard for me to tell the difference between the two. The leaves, the original leaves on the cutting of this Royal Flush are very, very narrow and long. However, some of the newer leaves that have been produced in my care look exactly like the lacunosa snow caps. Maybe they are the same, maybe they aren't, I don't know. This one is doing really well. It's put off quite a few vines of new growth. You can definitely see on the newer foliage of this lacunosa Royal Flush how it's kind of a deep purple. I'm excited that I have both of them now, so we can hopefully do a little comparison later on. Now, I love all my lacunosa blooms, but this specific next lacunosa, the lacunosa Poonsak, has some of the most gorgeous Hoya blooms on any Hoya that I have ever owned. When it first bloomed for me, I didn't really appreciate the blooms as much as I should have. I took photos of them, I posted them, but I was like, oh, it's just a lacunosa bloom. And it took my friend Lydia to want to take photos with her macro lens for me to really understand how absolutely gorgeous these blooms were. The corolla is bright, bright white, and the inside, the star shape, the corona, is almost like glass. It looked like crystal. It was transparent. It was beautiful. It's only bloomed once for me, but the bloom is rebudding right now. and I'm so excited to see these again. This one does have a unique foliage shape. They're very narrow and also kind of short. You can see the raised veins on these as well. This one has been growing really well for me, but it has dropped a bunch of leaves. It's created a lot of vines, it's created a lot of new leaves, but sometimes those leaves will grow to be maybe like a ½ an inch long, and then they'll turn yellow, and all it takes is a little tap and they fall right off. So I don't know why it's doing that. I have inspected this thing closely with my microscope to ensure that there are no mites or any microscopic pests on it. And it has a clean bill of health ever since I've had it. I think maybe it's just something that lacunosa does. It's still putting off a lot of new leaves that do not blast, so I'm just gonna let it be for now. Every time I talk about this Hoya or post it or say its name, Hoya Poonsak, people are like, what a weird name. And yeah, I mean, I guess I could see how that'd be a very strange name. This Hoya was registered by David Little, and Poonsak was the name of his driver on the expedition to find new Hoya species. And Poonsak decided to climb a tree to collect this specific lacunosa species, and David Little decided to name it after him. So that is where the name comes from. Okay, the next sets of Hoya lacunosa are not specifically registered or named or given their own name, I should say, but they are identified by where they were collected. So I will just talk about them with how I've purchased them or got them as gifts. And this one is the Hoya lacunosa from Indonesia. Now, speaking of raised vein leaves, this one takes the cake out of all of my lacunosa. You can feel the texture, and it's almost like a leather feel on these leaves. This one was kind of stagnant for a while, however, it has put off a new vine as of now. And seeing these new leaves develop is so cool because they're tiny, but you can definitely see all of the texture on the leaves. And I absolutely love this one. So I'm excited for this one to keep growing and see how the foliage develops from being brand new baby leaf to mature. But this one is definitely, the foliage is a stunner. Next up is my Hoya lacunosa from Malaysia. Again, it's a very textured leaf. This one's a lot smoother than the one from Indonesia, but I love this green foliage on this Hoya. This one has not bloomed for me. It's still quite a small plant. It has put off quite a few vines, which I'm really happy about. One day I'll see a peduncle and we'll get to see these flowers. It's still a stunner while it's not flowering. And again, these leaves, they're just so smooth. Next up is another newer-ish cutting of a lacunosa. This one is Hoya lacunosa Mentawai. This one has been kind of small. The new leaves that are growing are getting bigger. Again, like I said, leaf shape varies drastically over this species based on conditions. I'm excited to watch these new leaves kind of develop to see how big they're gonna get. But they are gorgeous leaves like most of the other lacunosas, and this one seems really happy so far. It's grown a lot of roots, it's putting off lots of new growth. There are some speckles on these leaves, some splash, not a lot, but you know, some splash is better than no splash. I kind of like that look. Now for my tiniest leaved Hoya lacunosa. This one is Hoya lacunosa Perangin Durian. I get a little confused by this one because when I look up Perangin Durian, usually that's a location, and it is. There is a waterfall, but the waterfall is called Durian Perangin, so I don't know why they're switched, or maybe I'm not looking at the right place. But in any case, this one is such a cutie. These leaves are so tiny, and I have looked this plant up online, and some of the full baskets of this Hoya have bigger leaves. So my guess is this one will grow out to have bigger leaves, but right now they're just very tiny, cute, adorable little leaves. And I kind of don't want it to change because it is very unique compared to most of the other lacunosa. Side note, have any of you ever eaten the fruit durian? And if you have, what do you think about it? I tried it a little over 3 months ago, and I gotta tell you, it was probably one of the nastiest things I've ever tasted. I think durian is really polarizing between people. I've never grown up eating it. I know that it is very common in Filipino families or Asian families to eat durian, but ugh. From what I hear, even from my friends who are Filipino, it's very polarizing. Some people absolutely love it, some people hate it. I was more on the hate it spectrum. It kind of just tasted like garbage. I don't know how to explain it. And honestly, you can't understand until you try it. So if you ever have the chance, just give it a try, but don't spend a lot of money on it. Next up on the lacunosa train is the Hoya lacunosa SP species CF. Now, I don't know what CF stands for. I'm guessing it's a location. I don't really know. I tried looking it up online, so if you know, let me know down below. But this one is a lacunosa I got from my friend's shop, thegreenplant.az. Supposedly the flowers on this lacunosa variety are supposed to be drastically different from any of the other lacunosa type flowers. It's small, it's a tiny cutting, it hasn't bloomed for me yet, but I am really excited to see and witness what they look like. I have to be honest, some of these new leaves look very similar to my Sipatangensis, and also they're kind of sun stressing like my Sipatangensis, which is in the same family as the lacunosa, the Osteama or Osteema. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. My Sipatangensis does bloom quite often, so I can compare the blooms when that happens. But the leaves of this lacunosa SPCF are very smooth. You don't see a lot of raised veins on this. You can kind of visibly see the middle vein, the midrib vein on it, but it's very leathery and smooth. The new leaves, like I said, are sun stressing a little bit. You can see some maroon on them and they're adorable. All right, next Hoya lacunosa I want to talk about is my Hoya lacunosa Sumatra. And this one has been growing really well for me. It has put off a lot of new growth. However, some of these new leaves have a very pale chlorotic look to them. And I don't know if that's because of where I was keeping it and it was close to grow lights or what. It is a bit confusing to me because, oh, I think I just broke that. That's okay. That'll just force it to grow some new vines and we're gonna be good. Some of these new leaves, like this one here, in my care, are the right color, green, the very kind of splashy on them. But then the next ones off that same vine have very pale color. And over on this vine that I just broke with my hair, these top two sets of leaves that just developed are, I know it probably won't pick up on the camera, but they're like a pale pink, which could be cute, but part of me is like, yeah, we need you to photosynthesize, girls, so get some green in there. The next few Hoya are gonna be my variegated lacunosas that I absolutely adore. The first one is the Hoya lacunosa Asami Clone 2. I got this one from Ara as well. She gave me a cutting, and it was really kind of her. The leaves that grew in Ara's care have a very white outer margin variegation. The leaves that have grown in my care are getting quite big. You can see that they're rather large, like very large. And they do have some variegation on them. As it continues down this vine, the variegation is visible on the outer edge of the leaf, but it's getting lower and lower. It has put off 2 new vines right here, more than likely because this main growing vine dipped down. So gravity pulled it down and the plant's hormones were like, oh, we gotta put out a new vine. It's almost like releasing apical dominance when you cut your aroids or any other plants where you cut off the growing tip and it releases those hormones to tell the plant, put off a new vine, our growing tip has been damaged or it's gone. I find that my lacunosa do that when they dip below the pot. So I don't mind having them trail and not on trellises. So that was the outer variegated lacunosa, and I also have an inner variegated one because when there's an outer variegation, you have an inner variegation. This one was a plant that my friends Jesse, Lydia, and I bought together because the price was kind of high. So we pitched in together, I've grown it out, I've given Lydia cuttings of this plant, I'm rooting cuttings for Jesse. When we got this, it was like in a tiny little like 2-inch cup and it had maybe like 3 or 4 vines and it's grown into this, and I have cut this a couple times. The leaves were really tiny when we first got it, but they've grown out and grown into larger leaves than the original ones. And the variegation is just beautiful throughout this plant. It does have one vine here that is variegated at the base with the leaves, but right about here is where the variegation has stopped. But I kind of love having a mixed pot of Hoya. There's a couple Hoya of mine that are variegated Hoya that have one vine of the original plant. So it's like you have the original plant mixed in with the mutation of variegation. And I kind of like that. All right, we've almost reached the end. I just have a few more plants to show you, and these aren't specifically lacunosa, but lacunosa was either one of the parents of these plants. And some of these are also some of my favorite Hoya, so I wanted to show them as well. First up, we have the Hoya Sunrise, which is a cross between Hoya obscura and Hoya lacunosa, I believe variety pallidiflora. This one sun stresses beautifully. I don't know if it'll pick up really well on camera, but some of these vines have a nice deep red purple color. And this one is one of those Hoya that could be bright red if you give it direct sunlight. However, I don't tend to force stress my Hoya. This one does sit in this window right here. You can see the empty planter right there, the plant hanger. And that's where this one lives. And it gets bright, direct morning sun and dappled indirect light. This thing has grown so huge. I unboxed this Hoya, the same video that I unboxed the Hoya lacunosa black leaves. And they both have just grown into beasts of plants. I truly don't know what to do with this one anymore because some of these vines are just going so wild. I did put it on a bamboo trellis, as you can see back here. I don't know where to go from here. I mean, it's filling up the trellis, so I guess we'll just let it do its own thing. This one, before I repotted it into this bigger pot, flowered constantly. When I repotted it, it dropped a lot of its peduncles. Hasn't flowered in a while until recently, and it's now put off some beautiful flowers. And these ones also smell delicious, no surprise. The next lacunosa cross that I have is a Hoya lacunosa X obscura. Now that is the same as the Sunrise as far as the parents go. We're just not sure what variety of lacunosa started this one. The leaf shape is different from the Sunrise. And this one also has splash. So this is the Hoya lacunosa X obscura with splash. It's put off quite a few new leaves in my care, and I'm happy to say that the splash mutation has continued, at least on this one vine. This other vine that's growing, I can see some splash on these leaves, but they're still quite young, and the splash develops as they grow. And we finally reached the end, the last lacunosa that I have to show you. And this one is very special to me. This is a hybrid from Unsolicited Plant Talks, and it's unknown what other plant this is crossed with. But once you see the foliage on this lacunosa, you're gonna understand why I love it so much. So this is the Hoya lacunosa X unknown seedling. And I gotta tell you, the foliage of this plant is stunning. The shape of the leaves of this Hoya are very ovate, almost cordate, almost like that heart-shaped. The original leaves from these cuttings are very wide, and when I saw it in April's greenhouse, I was like, what Hoya is this? And she told me, well, it's a cross between a lacunosa and I don't know what. And then she very graciously gave me a cutting of it, and I'm so happy to have this plant. It does have some splash on these newer leaves, not a ton, but it's there. Most Hoyas have at least a few little spots of splash, and I think it's really cute. This is probably one of the Hoyas that I look at the most daily to watch how these leaves develop, to see what they're gonna look like when they're mature, to watch the entire process. I absolutely adore this one. And it does have a peduncle here. It came with a peduncle on the original cutting. I honestly thought it was probably gonna fall off when I snipped all of the, she gave me a long vine and I snipped it to plant a bunch of cuttings. And it stayed and continues to bloom. And the flowers, just like most of the other lacunosa, are very beautiful, fuzzy, and they smell delicious. All right, you did it. You made it to the end of the video. That is all of my lacunosas in my collection. I believe there's probably around 18 of them, and a lot of them are still quite small, but they do grow fast. So I'm excited to just have shelves full of beautiful flowing lacunosas that just bloom and fill my house with that sweet, sweet scent. Let me know down below which one of these has been your favorite, which one you're gonna be on the lookout for, which one you might wanna find yourself, and also what lacunosa do you currently have in your collection that is your favorite? I wanna know. Let's talk lacunosa. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you in my next video. As always, I appreciate you hanging out with me. Thanks for watching.